Palestine, to a certain extent, is truly a spectacular experience in narration, and therefore in literature. How to narrate. Witnessing the ease with which others can narrate an event that perhaps takes place around me with a clear beginning, a middle, and an end. While I would be still struggling to find how to narrate that. Of course, this experience of clarity is something that is not accessible to you growing in Palestine. And then you think, what kind of narration is possible for you sincerely, without you othering yourself or experiences? And I quite see that often. For instance, when a Palestinian asked to retell what they experienced, there's always this moment of hesitation. One could call it a stutter in narration. Where to start? One may start saying, yesterday. But after a moment of hesitation, returns, no, in fact, a week ago. But actually, a month ago. Or, to be more precise, 30 years ago. And no, in fact, it was 100 years ago. And you see this narrative. The beginning becomes a constant return where to begin. And even you see the narrative taking place in backward and forward, and this total confusion. And I see that sometimes silence is a result of this confusion. Where to start? And would what you consider the most important, in fact, be really important for those who are not in that position, not in that experience? And this is very interesting. What is considered as important and totally irrelevant. I remember working as a translator to Scandinavian networks. It could have been with a Danish or a Swedish news team. We visited a refugee camp, Balata refugee camp, near Nablus in 2002, where there was a re-invasion of major cities by the Israeli military. It was a difficult period. Many people were killed. I think when we arrived, there were about 70 people to be buried. And we continued to Balata refugee camp, where the Israeli military introduced a method called walking through walls, meaning that the military would not walk in the streets, and especially in a refugee camp, which is very tight. The Israeli military decided to walk through the homes. So, and these homes are not homes in the sense that they're grand. They can be sometimes one room in a refugee camp. So the soldiers would enter, they would bomb the external wall, they walk inside the room, and then they bomb the next wall. And it becomes like walking through walls, like a worm going through an apple, making the way. Through this operation, near one home, the explosion they put is next to an electricity pole on the other side. So the house burns, or that home burns, or that room burns. And they abandon this walking, then they search for something else, a different way to move. So we reached to this we arrive at this home, or the family where this home got burned, to meet them. The husband got severely burned. Everything in the house is burned. The hospitals were filled with injured people, so they couldn't keep the man there. He was the first one to go and to try to stop the fire. They all were sleeping in the same room, because these invasions or re-invasions normally take place after midnight, between 2 and 4 a.m. People are asleep, they don't hear. And they described actually how they woke up in the sound of explosion next to the wall of the room they were sleeping in. So he tries to put the fire off. He got burned. He cannot be in the hospital. So we arrive there, and he's covered with many covers, moaning with pain, and we only could speak to his wife. And I was translating. I was supposed to translate her experience of what happened. So the journalist asks, and I translate back. And this is very interesting role of the translation, of exactly thinking which details would be interesting for the journalist and which needs to be abandoned. She tells us, I translate, and towards the end, she tells me that her identity card got burned. And I know the journalists don't care about that, so I don't translate it. But she insists. She tells me, tell them my identity card got burned. And you see, everything is burned in this house, in this room. Everything. Her husband, their belongings, everything. But she was insisting to share the fact that her identity card got burned. And I was afraid to translate that suddenly she become unreliable narrator, the unstable narrator of events that is putting so much importance on this small detail, but not all the horror around. And I don't translate, and she insists that I translate. And I pretend that I translate, but I say something else, because the journalists see that she wants to say something. And then I was thinking, are you crazy? Like, I could imagine the news. 70 people got killed in Nablus, and her name was Selma, I still remember it, and Selma's identity card got burned. There's no place for that. But for her, that was the most important. And this is, for me, that was a moment of, with whom am I to learn narration? Is it a narration that follows on the footsteps of the journalist, and therefore the observers who observe things from their own position of safety and comfort? Or Selma, who lost everything, who is experiencing this pain in every aspect. And this story really kept coming back to me. What can never be there for an objective narration, and what really can find a place in literature. In literature, there is a place for Selma and for her focus on the least important elements in terms of those who think a bombing of a home is more important. For Selma, they both were as important. And wondering why this was important. And you see these details constantly are shared but are eliminated in a certain type of narrative, the narrative of history. History has no place for Selma's concerns. They are irrelevant. But for her, they are so relevant. And then you think, where can she exist? And this is what's fascinating about literature and fiction. The ability to to move us or lead us away from the limits of reality. And this is just one instance. You have it with so many things. Because it's your life. It's the details of your life that are being attacked, that being eliminated from reality. And I go back to this experience as a kid of trying to bring in imagination those things that they did not have a place in reality. Reality was not generous enough, whereas literature appears to be more generous, especially for experience of severe pain. The question of beginning, how to begin, the struggle with the beginning, the constant struggle where to begin, that it almost becomes the most difficult form of narrative, this constant return, the return, and which words return back. I was haunted by this question, also of the classical narrative form, and this brokenness of narrative, which I'm more intimate with the brokenness of narrative. These questions have pushed me over years to come to understanding the two options, the two possibilities of narration. But what's more was haunting to me, will those who experience narrative as a broken structure, will they be ever able to imitate the perfect narrative? And what does this make them? How it changes them? If you follow the narrative structure of those who speak clearly, who are in position of power, are you going to be also adapting their method of power and indifference to the pain of others or the details of the pain of others? And for me, that was essential. Exercise and thought in writing. Writing allows that. Writing allows you to be somewhere with your curiosity and your questions without it activating the violence that we need sometimes to change things in reality. In reality, you create a sort of a force and a shift that you want to enforce, whereas in fiction, you can be in that position and you return to another. And this, I think, it's with every experience of reading, but also I thought it is possible in writing. So I was very interested how I can imitate those who speak perfectly, those who know where to begin, the middle, and the end. And I think with my first novel, I was still struggling with the broken narrative. And with the second one, it was more about the broken characters and the brokenness of their movement. But with time, when I also experienced the violence of this clear narrative and not allowing a place for the broken narrative and claiming the broken narrative is irrational, illogical. And this is what I'm intimate with then, with this irrationality, with this brokenness, with this fragility and vulnerability in terms of narration. And I wanted to work with both of them and to see which characters will be able to carry those two forms of narration. It really, at the end, became just two parts. And when I think about my previous novels, I think the first novel was about 30 parts. And the second one, it became 8 parts. But in this case, it became, in the last novel, it became 2 parts. And each time it is necessary. These parts are necessary. And here, the necessity was how how words move from that form of narrative, clear narrative, what life they can have in the broken narrative. I don't see me being silenced in the way that I would accept that. For me, I relate to silence, but not to silencing or being silenced, because there is violence in those two acts of silencing and silent. And for me, this violence is or engaging with this violence or accepting this violence is supporting it. And therefore, it's not my question. It's not something that will be given a place in my thinking and in my life. Because exactly when you grow up in a context of like Palestine, where language is always attacked, erased, naming is something that you don't have access to. You cannot name the place you are in. You cannot name the destruction that fell upon you. And so it becomes not that you're not able because others are not allowing you, but because perhaps it's again to the time of not yet. Language is not yet there for you. I think with silencing and being silenced, also there's a treatment of language which lacks love as the central element in it. And I think about it. Does these acts affect my relation to language and to the possibilities that language still offer in different forms and possibilities and flexibly within silence? Language doesn't disappear in silence. On the contrary, it becomes more available to you. And this is how it comes, the idea of the start, where to start. You know, the inability to know where to start will always allow you to go back to consider a new start. And there is this infinite sense of freedom within that. So there is an experience of silence as a dignified relation between you, your words, and what is there available in language for you. I don't think people accept to be silenced. There's always a way to shift that. And I can see that with the silence of the experience of the war, the ongoing war. Actually, it never stopped in Palestine. There's an ongoingness of this experience of violence also in language that then it finds a different place. And this, you grow up with this realization. You don't take silence or silencing as an end, but as a moment, a passing moment that allows you a different form of engagement. You turn into almost a magician, how you turn conditions of oppression into different types of conditions. We learned poetry as kids already when we were 10 at school. And we started with the Arabic epic poetry from the 7th century. And what's specific about these poems, that they always started on a site of destruction. The poet needed to come to a site of destruction to start the poem. With time, you realize that what the poet does at that moment turns destruction into something completely different. And this destruction not only becomes in terms of structures or buildings or destruction of nature, but also destruction of language and the attempt to stop you. Therefore, I also understand writing as a practice that emerged from the possibilities of this silence. The silence of reading, but also the silence involved in writing. So it becomes a creative force, this silence.